They're pretty significant. The taking of Liman in the northeast, near where I am, that is a transport hub for the Russians. It is also the gateway to Donetsk and Luhansk, areas which the Russians control. So that's pretty important for the Ukrainians. Ukrainian soldiers who I've been talking to in the last few days say, you know, sometimes the Russians aren't even standing and fighting. They just abandon their vehicles and leave on foot. And then on this other front, down in the southeast near Kherson, significant gains today. The Ukrainian Ministry of Defense has been putting out pictures of the Russian flag being taken down and the Ukrainian flag being raised in several of these villages. Now, the Ukrainians now surround the Russians, maybe 25,000 Russian troops in this area, and on the other side, there's the river Dnieper. So what that means is that increasingly as the weeks go by, it'll be very difficult for Russians to resupply themselves in these areas. So I think that these are important gains for the Ukrainians.
So, Lindsay, what are the Russians saying about all of this?
Well, not a lot. We've heard in the last few minutes that President Putin is reported to have gone to the Kremlin for a special meeting of the Security Council. We don't know exactly what that means. We heard from his spokesman this morning, Dmitry Peskov, who had to admit, well, actually, this territory that we have annexed, we're not quite sure where the borders are because we don't control all of it. In Kherson, the man who the Russians have installed as the leader there had to admit today that he was losing territory. He didn't know really what he controlled anymore or what his people controlled anymore. So I think you can see a certain amount of disarray amongst the Russians. And they really don't know what to say because they cannot continue to claim that they are winning what they call a special military operation.
Lindsay in Kyiv, thanks very much. Well, earlier I spoke to the Finnish Foreign Minister Pekka Haavisto, and I began by asking him whether he thought that the gains that Ukraine have made means that Putin is losing the war.
Well, I think there has been two big backtracks for Putin. First, of course, that in the beginning of the war, he couldn't occupy the capital, Kyiv. He couldn't change the government, as was probably the originally plan, and now, of course, Russia is in difficulties on the eastern and southern parts of Ukraine. So it looks like our support to Ukraine has been beneficial to Ukraine, but also the will of defense is very strong in Ukraine at the moment.
So as the EU member with the longest border with Russia, do you think a humiliated Putin is more or less dangerous to you and the rest of the EU?
Well, of course, we don't ask any humiliation. We just ask Russia to respect the borders. Of course, we have seen recently more loose talk about the use of nuclear weapons, tactical nuclear weapons, and so forth. And of course, we see all kinds of risks for escalation. And I think the best to happen, of course, is that Russia withdraws to its own borders and the war will stop.
The US Defense Secretary said on that issue of the use of nuclear weapons that he believes, you know, the Russian leader may not be bluffing on that. What is your view? Is it a bluff or not?
Well, of course, the nuclear issue has been raised already in the very beginning of the war, this kind of loose talk about the nuclear weapons, chemical weapons, and so forth. And I have to admit that that was one of those motivations why Finland decided, together with Sweden, join NATO, because there are many risks that we can defend ourselves with our own tools. But of course, if you speak about the nuclear or chemical risk or any unconventional risks, hybrid, cyber threats, we need cooperation. And that's why we decided to apply for the NATO membership.
So how fearful are you that your application to join NATO has not been cleared by Turkey, amongst others, yet? And do you fear that Turkey will block that membership bid?
Well, I have just recently met both with the Hungarian Foreign Minister Peter Szijjártó and the Turkish Foreign Minister Mevlut Cavusoglu. We had excellent talks, good understanding also of the situation. I underlined that this mobilization that is ongoing now in Russia is an additional argument why we would like to be members of NATO, we would like to be protected by NATO, but also we would like to offer our support for the whole defense alliance.
You said in August that you feared this war could go on for many years. Given what we've seen of Putin's weakness in recent months, do you think you were being unduly pessimistic, or do you still stand by that?
Well, it's never wrong to be a little bit pessimistic when you speak about the wars and conflicts, because very often you think that things cannot get worse, and then suddenly they can get worse. I think we have to prepare for a long war. We have to be ready also for our own burden can get higher in the form of the energy prices, and globally we have seen the food shortages and so forth. So this has implications. This has also global implications, and we have to be ready for that, because this is a very important principle that we are fighting for.
Pekka Haavisto, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.